Real life.
Superpowers.
You have got to talk to people, right? You have just, and it's just a numbers game, right? You need to make sure that people are aware of what you're doing and you talk to enough of them, right? And sometimes you have a high hit rate, sometimes it's low, but like there's nothing stopping you from, and that's what I did for those first 18 months of the company is I just called and hit and emailed and LinkedIn every single person that I had ever met in my entire career. And then everybody that sat in a seat that was related to any of that.
Welcome to Real Life Superpowers. I'm Noah Eshed, here with my co-host Renan Manipaz. Today's guest is Eli Goodman, co-founder and CEO of Datos, which was acquired by Semrush. After more than 2 decades in the data industry, Eli founded Datos in 2020 to deliver trustworthy clickstream data for institutional and corporate markets, a focus that ultimately led to its acquisition. He's also a recognized authority on data licensing with over 100 keynotes delivered worldwide. Let's dive into his mindset.
Real life.
Superpowers.
Up in the sky, it's a bird. It's a plane.
Gentlemen, we can rebuild him. We have the technology.
It's alive!
Real life.
Superpowers.
Eli, welcome to Real Life Superpowers.
Thanks for having me. How are you guys?
We're good. What are you up to these days?
Keeping busy. I beyond work, which obviously is all encompassing, it feels like sometimes, and then leading into the holidays in Q4, I have a soon to be 2-year-old as an old dad keeps me very busy. So hands are full, but full life. It's exciting.
Would you encourage your 2-year-old to be an entrepreneur?
If it's something that she really believes in and wants to do. Right? And I don't want to call it that it has to be a passion project or something that you love, but you would better be prepared for what's going to come your way because it does feel like you're Atlas holding up the world at times, even on a small scale. And that isn't necessarily a place that everybody wants or should be. So I would say it's buyer beware.
What's bad about it?
Well, I think where I would start is, and I'll jokingly call it sleep or lack thereof, right? And that isn't necessarily is actual, as if you're only sleeping 3 hours a night. I feel that that's kind of silly. I just think it's where you always feel like you have one eye open. And it was something, as I just mentioned, becoming a father a couple of years ago, where I feel that I'm constantly on perimeter watch around here, right? Like I'm the head of security. You never know what's going to go on. So at all times, you're sort of on edge. And founding of a company and building it out, right, and scaling there's a major responsibility to that I've been through startups, I have had exits, I've done any number of things, which I'm happy we're going to talk about, career arc today. But this is the first time putting out my own shingle. And it's really like the classic, the buck stops with you. I mean, if you're not figuring it out, it's not getting done. And I think that people put a lot of faith in you when you hire them and you work together and partner, because it takes a certain type of personality to want to go into and work for a startup and probably take less money and more long on opportunity and things like that. So there's that type of faith that people will put in you. It's a heavy personal responsibility. I could certainly go into this deeper, but that's how I would color it, right? Is that if you are an empath and you actually care, right, which I do, I am not a sociopath, that's not my deal. I don't want to say that people that work with you and for you are family, because they should have families and they should outrank the company, but it's definitely a community, right? So there is a responsibility that goes along with it. So when I talk about, or when you might ask about what's difficult about it, that's where I would start, is just the weight of the entire thing.
Were you aware of that before you started your own company?
It's like anything. You could learn about something in school or watch somebody else do it, but until you are the one that is sitting in the seat, I just don't think that there's a way to really understand what that means, right? Again, you could sympathize all you want, but you can't empathize until you've done it. And now that I've done it, would I do it again? Sure, right? I absolutely would. But like anything, you would go about doing things in different ways, right? It's not, everything is derivative, right? If you're doing things right, you're learning and you're failing, right? You have to be pushing the envelope. So anyway, like, yeah, I could pontificate about all of that, like, as long as we want to go, but that's at a big picture, just again, the weight and responsibility of it, because it's more than just like the product or the business, it's the people, right? And it's their lives and their livelihoods, right? They have families, want to send their children to school, they want to own homes, like everybody needs to do things. So figuring out how to balance that as a function of what is the purpose of the business, which is to sell things, right? Is, it's kind of a tightrope you could walk sometimes.
But as an SVP in Semrush, right? I'm correct that like you were also managing people, right? And then afterwards, you developed the company. Okay, is there a really big difference between managing them? They still have livelihoods. They're still dependent. They still trust you. You know what I mean? Like,
let me flip the ordering of that, right? Because only recently, like, I founded Datos with my co-founders back at the beginning of, call it mid 2020 is when it really came together. And Semrush was our initial strategic investor, but we sold majority interest to Semrush in late 2023. And only very recently have I merged into Semrush to manage, call it our SVP. So certainly for the past 5.5 years, like straight startup, right? Like with just us sitting around a table, actually a virtual table, because I never even met my co-founders in person for 18 months because it was high COVID time, which is kind of an interesting story. But yeah, it's not just managing of people. We're talking about, like, when you start a company, every single day you wake up, you're like, okay, first thing, when are we out of money? Right? Like the first thing is, can we create something and make it sustainable? Right. I think that's the number one thing. And that's what I mean by, it's one thing to present people with an opportunity of a place to work or a career to build or what have you. But what happens if that ends, right? The gate drops on it and it's over. It doesn't matter how much you want to do something. There isn't even an entity anymore, or potentially wouldn't be an entity. So that's what I talk about. The weight of things is, it's not just the managing or captaining of a ship, it's building it from scratch and then doing all of that and keeping going.
And when did you decide that you're going to do your own thing?
Going all the way back, if I say my career now over 25 years, like I graduated university in the late 90s, I don't come from a land or like a background of entrepreneurs, right? Like my parents worked and they had corporate jobs here in the United States, but I certainly didn't come from any sort of fancy high-end background or anything like that. And like when I was graduating college, I had 6 figures of student loans and I wasn't really sure what I wanted to do, but I knew I needed to make money, right? I just needed to pay my bills. I didn't want to live on mom and dad's couch, and I was going to go out into the world. I'm Gen X, so I don't know how everybody does it. For us, it was just like, I'll see you when I see you type of thing. And so it was for many, many years. I'd thought about it was interesting. I'd be like, hey, what if I started my own company? But I never really had a particular idea, or to be very frank, the financial wherewithal, like the risk profile in order to do so, right? Like I wanted to live in New York, where I now have been for, again, almost 25 years. That takes a particular financial commitment to be able to even just survive, right, in New York City, let alone to eventually flourish. So it wasn't really until there was like this inflection point of several different things that happened, which was I had finally in my career, I had gotten over on the financials of New York City. I had gotten over on the financials of things like student loans and background and owning a home and, just like things that you do in order to like grow your financial base, which then allows you to take on more risk. And then really the kicker was COVID hit, right? My last company, we had an exit and that ended, that was early 2020. And then I was looking at any number of interesting opportunities and the potential to be back to CEO, to found a company, like really cool stuff. And then COVID hit, right? It was mid-March, and we all know what happened in the world at that point. Everything went into lockdown. And I would say the decision-making paradigm around starting of a company started to open up a little bit. Like all of us were probably on the couch playing too many video games, waiting to figure out what was going to happen in the world. And your willingness to take chances is certainly a function of your environment. And that's what was going on. So I would say that was the final push.
The fact that you had a front seat to an exit because you were working at a company that got sold, did that sort of make it feel more realistic, and also sort of inspire you in a sense because you saw it unfold? I mean, you're probably not in the details, but you probably saw enough to figure out maybe that's something that you also want for yourself.
Well, the answer is yes on all of that, but it's actually a collection. I've had, multiple exits and an IPO at different companies along the way over the course of the past 20 years.
Which is also interesting because you chose companies that ended up selling.
Well, luck favors the prepared, right? It wasn't
Right.
as if you just sort of it happened by accident necessarily, but it was also, I have been at varying levels within those organizations to be able to have, as you're talking about, front row seats, or at least seats in the building, to understand what was going on, what it felt like, what were the pitfalls and whatnot. So it's funny, if I take you back to an early time, so let's say it's 2007, right? And I was working at a place called Hitwise at the time. It doesn't exist anymore, but at the time it was an independent company based out of Australia, and I was here in New York City, just a young salesperson, right, working the org. And when you're that type of level at an organization, you don't really get a lot of details, right, about anything that's going on. You're like, here's your job, this is what you do. But one of the first things that I learned, is when you start to how to be able to put your ear close to the ground, or how to be able to feel things that are happening. There were different things that began to happen, and these were very important moments in my career that some insignificant seeming at the time, and others actually put me on a particular path. The particular path one was, I was working at this company, and a lot of it was about search at the time. So data for search, right? It was sort of a new thing. It's like relatively early Google and the intelligence around it. And I, in my career, having started out as just a sales guy, right? I always loved selling, and I want to be near revenue, but I wanted to do more, right? I wanted to be able to create. And I remember, I had an idea about something around data, particularly around search data, using it less about just pure direct response and positioning, right? Like click here, buy now, et cetera, and about the impression-based, sort of branding aspect of it, like classic advertising, which makes up, certainly at that time, 70% of all advertising was still branding advertising, right? Like the legacy feeling and likelihood of purchase and aided and unaided recall and those types of things in your old school brand metrics. So I went to my leadership at the time and I said, I have an idea for something. And I laid out my idea and I said, I would like to build this. I think I would be interested to do this. And long story short, they more or less said to me, yeah, not interested, go back to your desk. Okay, that was a very important moment. And I say this in relation to your point about sitting in the seat, because something else happened within a week that seemed insignificant at the time, but was very strange. And the next week, we got called into an all-company meeting, and the general manager of the U.S., because the CEO was based in Australia, but the general manager of the U.S. sat us all down, the entire New York office. And the thing was about that the office was drinking too much of the free milk, that the free milk was supposed to be for coffee and not for cereal. And it was a very serious thing that they were laying into. And I remember one of my colleagues turning to me and was like, this place is going to be sold. We got to get out of here. Right? That was a notification. So what I'm getting at within both of those stories is that when you're young, you don't really, it's not necessarily what ended up happening was I took a new job and the company was sold soon after to Experian. But those were things that now, with having experience 20 plus years on top of that experience behind me, I would be in a better position to be able to notice little things where it wasn't even necessarily that I took it personally at the time that they were yeah, not interested in doing the thing with the business. But part of it was that they were not investing in anything new here, because we're sort of at the end of what it clearly was a process that got settled within the next few months. Or the milk thing was because every single dollar was being judged about the profitability or the P&L of the company at the time, right? And it's not something that as however old I was at that time in my late 20s, I just had ever thought about. So anyway, I reference those when you talk of what do you learn along the way. It's not just when you were in the executive team and then you have that front row seat to what happens in an acquisition, or eventually when I founded the company and went through it, but you could miss those little leading indicators about what's going on with the business and what matters and why.
How does that indicate the milk thing? Why does, because of the vibe that changed? How did you Just like, why was that an issue?
It was an issue in the sense that the business was 300 plus people. We knew the business was doing well. Everybody was hitting numbers. And it was such an insignificant spend, right? In the grand scheme of things, I can't imagine that the milk bill for the New York office, which maybe was 50 people, was so outrageous that the general manager had to sit everybody down and dress the entire place down about the milk consumption. And so I reference, that's what I'm saying, is that when something feels, how do I put it? It feels out of place, right? Like it didn't really make sense in everything else that was going on. That why is this something that the general manager needed to sit us all down and talk about? And that's what I'm saying is when you sort of don't realize sometimes like these, again, little things when they start to stack together could tell a bigger story. So that's all I'm referencing is going back to in my career, having different seats at different levels about different things related to when you have an exit or an IPO or a discussion around it.
It sort of makes me think also about how we sometimes will take something personally or get into this very narrow vision. And as healthy it is to be self-critical, we also should really be able to ask yourselves sort of objective questions, because you could have been so demotivated with that response, and you could have told yourself that maybe it's a really bad idea, or that maybe, you don't understand how things work because obviously they're senior and they're dismissing it. And there you go. Like the reason was completely irrelevant. And then like with the milk, it's, it's so easy to fall into a quote unquote trap of, wow, the culture here is horrible, or just to feel bad. And the context here is actually what makes the entire difference. So, basically, although it did sound like he was on the verge of a mental breakdown, because why would you expose that and focus on it? But just being able to step back and take a breath and ask yourself, wait, what's this really about? Can perhaps sometimes make a world of a difference to an extent of making a different life choice.
Yeah, well, one thing I'll say is that think about that as, and I use that as like a little anecdotal story from 20 something years ago to where now founding a company, running a company, it's taking that and using it about how would I have done it differently? And how do I do things differently? And I, as much as you can't be transparent about everything because of just general confidentiality or the nature of business or whatever related to that. But if I had been in that seat, knowing what I know now, and if I was the person that had to have that discussion, it wouldn't have had to be punitive, right? To say like, stop it. It was more or less like, if you don't do this, you're all fired. You know what I mean? It was that style of anger that was being pushed to us, as opposed to being like,
maybe he became vegan.
Right. Well, it could be, right? But it's like, if you think about it, it could be as easily, and part of this is really where I think that you engender like loyalty and focus and belief in a business. It would have been very easy to be able to sit down and say, hey, one of the things that we do as a business on an ongoing basis is we have to solve for what is profitability in our P&L. And it may seem like a little thing, but everything that we do around here comes from a particular budget and how we go about doing stuff. And milk is representative of one of those. It may seem small, but nickels and dimes make dollars. So, we would absolutely, just to help you guys, help us, help you and all of us, we want to be able to stay in line so that the little things don't keep us from spending on the big ones that are most important. Blah, blah, blah. But I'm just saying there's a completely different way to be able to frame what something like that is. So that's where I go back to remembering, like when you found a company, run a company, manage big teams, whatever it may be, every single word that comes out of your mouth could potentially be construed or misconstrued. So you need to be thoughtful about how and why you do things and how you communicate with your team, with your colleagues, with people, your employees. Anyway, it seems silly, like, Milkgate, we would jokingly call it, but it's a snowball type of thing that you don't think about, but it really could pick up speed if you don't do it right.
Well, that was their claim, but yeah, in a sense. No, I mean, with respect to them saying basically that's a small thing that could eventually end up with spending too much. But that's just ironic. But so walk us through becoming an entrepreneur.
Well, like anybody, right? You go throughout your career, and I hope everybody has both of these experiences, but there are any number of people that you meet along the way that you work for or work with that you look up to, right? They become mentors, or they become, people that you lean on, or they are champions of you, or any of that, right? Anything that's positive. But you also, every single one of us is going to have a boss or bosses that we don't believe should be in that seat, or aren't particularly good, or overmatched. It happens to all of us, right? We all could end up on all of this. But I think all of those are important because it led to a point where, having known founders or people that have built companies on top of other people that had done the same thing, but it had inherited roles just because they were sitting around and that, the seat was available, is you started to get a feel for like, okay, if I were doing it, would I do it differently? Would I do it the same? Would I take some of this and some of this? And it becomes a recipe for how to be able to do whatever it is that you want to do. So for me, it was by the time that 2020 and COVID, and as I had said, that was like the final push to be like, okay, I'm feeling financially safe now that I can take some real chances here in my career and do something. Was I had digested all of that had happened over the course of the past 20, call it 20 plus years of my career, to say, you know what, like now I believe that I have what I need in order to be able to do this and have a chance for success, like a good chance for success. So it's not like this is a 1 in 1,000, right? And that actually, I'm a measure twice, cut once type of person when it comes to things. Like I definitely appreciate like bold movements and making quick decisions and all of that stuff. But when you're talking about the big things, that it's a classic thing. And I think it was the Navy SEALs that came up with it. It was slow is smooth and smooth is fast, right? And I think that's a very important and sort of simplified way to be able to think about like founding of a company. So my particular journey was, we need to do this in a way that I believe is both sustainable and has the right opportunity to grow, but we're not going to get out over our skis in a way that, and that led into how we went about raising money or not raising money, decisions that we made about the business or product or different chances we were going to take on certain things, but making sure that everybody along the way had proper expectations about what would be done. So that's what I mean by, it's almost like we ran the game theory of the whole thing was done before we even began, and ran every scenario we could think of.
Wait, who is we?
Oh, so that's myself. Three founders, right? At Datos, myself and my co-founders, Serge and Stan. So there were three of us. There are three of us, still with the business, all with Semrush now, where it was, the big thing was, why shouldn't we do this? It was like we had our own little mini red team, right? Which was, here's every reason in the world we should try this. But like, let's also run every scenario about why we shouldn't do this. And after we ran through those, that type of analyses, we landed on, we definitely should do this. Like, we have a unique angle to be able to do this. I believe we have a right path, Semrush being our initial seed investor, the right partner to be able to help us.
Wait, how did you know that Semrush would be the investors? Because the idea was obviously born before.
Yeah, well, we both independently, like when I met Serge and Stan, we both independently had relationships with Semrush executive team. Like Serge knew Oleg, the Semrush founder, from way back. They were old friends from like early Black Hat SEO days. I had known Eugene, who is the president of Semrush, for many years, just from doing business in search and whatnot. So it wasn't, when it all came together in 2020, like they were part of that discussion, right? Because they certainly, as a business, do a lot of venture capital investing and things of that nature. So yeah, it was a combination of a lot of things that had come together to be able to allow it to happen. But that's what I'm saying, is that we started with, especially when it comes to like big data.
Wait, but how did the three of you decide that you're going to do something together in the first place? I mean, becoming co-founders, that's
You never met them. Like, did you see that before?
Sure.
Like,
Yeah. So let's actually tell that story. That's an interesting story.
Yeah.
So COVID 2020, let's say that everybody that is here understands like how different things became very quickly in the world. And I had picked up a consulting gig during that time. I was just working from home here in New York, and I got a LinkedIn message from Serge, and it was more or less, "Hello, we are interested in clickstream business," because I've been doing it for many years. "We have some ideas about clickstream. See, you worked in clickstream. Maybe we should get together and chat." It was a cold LinkedIn email that they sent me. That was it. And, so we ended up, setting up Zoom meetings like anybody else. And we had a bunch of discussions. And when we found out through those discussions that we both had Semrush in common, right? Because I had spoken with Semrush, earlier in the year about potentially working here now. Them, going back to investing in me and a company and stuff. But they had another discussion going on as well. It was like another collection of people that are talking. So it was just by happenstance that they reached out, and then we got together, and then together we were like, "Hey, Semrush, we're all talking," and they were like, "Hey, that's great that you guys are together." It happened very organically, and that's where I go back to luck favoring the prepared, right? It was just a cold LinkedIn email that they sent to me. So we spent a few months really formulating an idea, and then we formally incorporated in October of 2020, and at that point, we're finishing up the seed raise discussions with Semrush. We formally did that in early 2021, and we were off to the races.
And when you were getting to know them, like, did you know what quote KPIs you're looking for in them? And it's, three is a crowd. Like, it's not even two co-founders. It's three people that group together for a cause and go onto one of the more challenging journeys that people can embark on together.
Well, I'll tell you what, three people, I didn't feel like was too many. Because one of the things was, what do we all bring to the table and what are we unique at? So if we talk about superpowers, right, is we need to be able to cover a lot of ground. And one of the most important things for me in my career that has helped with my success is self-awareness, right? I know what I'm good at. I know what I'm great at, but I also know what I'm not good at. And I know where my limitations are. So my number one thing is creating like revenue out of nothing. Right, like that's
a superpower.
That's a great superpower. It's something that the 0 to 1 of the world is certainly something where I do pretty well. But I am no computer science engineer, right? Like I don't know how to code. Like I'm not doing anything of that nature. And Serge and Stan have any number of technical background and operational acumen, like in sort of like your COO style of like running their own IT company at the time and different things. So it was or data sourcing, right? Like that is certainly like Serge is my co-founder, is an amazing data partnership, data sourcing professional. Right. Like, to be able to go through that. So it was really about us, again, is the whole more valuable than the pieces? And the answer was yes. Right. So that's really how many founders, in the, I'm just going to call it like in tech founding, there could be in anything, but like, how many you would come along and everybody is what I would call a fully baked pie, right? As in like has already done it and already exited and has built it a million times. You know what I mean? Like there's any number of, sure, there are people that do that, but then there's many more that will fail. So that's, if I'm going back to the point, it was the three of us figured out very quickly that, we checked a collection of boxes together and it was better to try it as a group.
But this was your first venture.
That was my first one where I was like founders cap table, right? Like, I was CEO, Serge, I think, was our chief strategy officer, we called it, and maybe Stan was our chief COO or CFO at the time. I can't remember exactly, even where our original titles landed. You sort of, figure out what everybody's going to do since we all, would do all of this stuff. But my prior company, I was the head of sales from when it was just us sitting around a table. So I was there at the founding time. We were born out of an incubator. So I wasn't one of the founders at that organization. When I had showed up at Comscore in 2007, it could have been more than 100 or 150 people, and we grew to 3,000, over the course of that time. Before that, Hitwise was maybe 150 people and sold at probably around 300. So, there were definitely like triggers along the way where I had familiarity with startup land, if you will, and the growth trajectory. But no, this is the first time that it was like, if we don't do this, nobody's getting paid.
Like where your superpower now literally meant money.
It came in handy, right? Made the calls.
And by the way, Eugene, is that Eugene Levin?
Yeah, Eugene's the president at Semrush.
Yeah, he was a guest on. I was just looking it up. He was the guest on our podcast, the 26th episode. This is several years back.
That's a great guy. We've known each other a long time now.
Yeah, it was a very interesting conversation. So when during this, you got together, you felt like the sum is bigger than the parts. You had angel investors that obviously were a good choice. When did it viscerally feel like, okay, we've got something here that checks all the boxes, that we can now cut?
Yeah, so it was probably about mid 2021, right? So let's call it like we really had gone to market like late November, December 2020, but let's just call it 2021 being the start. And it was 6 months in because we rolled over to be profitable. We were covering in 6 months all of our expenses, right? That was the first time where I think we really believed that, we were onto something and like our particular way of doing it. Well, it's also because we ran a very light budget, right? Like in the end, having done this for a long time and doing it as an older founder, right, in my 40s, right? Because many will be like, you must start companies in your 20s. And it's like, I barely even knew how to do anything in my 20s, let alone, found and run a company. So we took a very lean approach, particularly because it was during COVID, right? So everybody's remote. I never even met Serge and Stan for 18 months till I flew to Germany, which is where they're based.
So even different time zones.
Yeah. So like we were all over the world and like everybody was kind of spread out, right? Like throughout Europe and here in the United States, like where we had everybody. But that was by design. And I think this is one of the things that was a very important choice for us, which actually between 2021 through the end of 2023, so over the course of that 3 years, we had opportunities, like we thought about raising more money and like going out, talking venture capital, private equity and things like that. But the problem that we ran into, at least from our perspective with it, was if we raised that money, the expectations of the venture capital community about what you need to do with that money, which is, to simplify it, you need to light this money on fire for the sake of growth and then raise more money and light that money on fire and keep going. Burn is much less important than the growth, even after call it the 15 years of ZIRP, like zero interest rate phenomena style of low interest rates. So, but for our business, that type of light money on fire and growth trajectory, we didn't believe was particularly, it didn't match very well with the nature of our business, right? Like a clickstream data business is, from our end, the number one thing about being in the data supply business is, one, I am in the sugar business. Like I sell sugar to other people that bake cakes. Like at its core, that was how we had founded the business, right? Perpetual data supply.
Interesting. That's your analogy, because sugar, that's basically poison.
That's fair enough, right? But like, you could go with anything, but ingredients to building of other things, right? Like,
okay.
So no, I would not say that sugar's poison. Like that's fair, however you want to look at it. But thinking of it as what that business is, right? And like, what's your moat and all these other classic things you always will, these terms you'll hear in startup land. But it's also about being in the data business. To me, the number one thing about being in data is that the data needs to be sustainable. And especially if you sell data to others that build product off of it, that needs to go on in perpetuity. Right? You cannot have the rug pulled out from under you and then unturned underneath from under your clients, because again, that point I made earlier about the weight of things and the responsibility is people are building because they know that you are taking the right steps in order to ensure that their supply continues. So venture capital for us was, in order to raise money, it was the growth expectations that were going to come along with that. I didn't feel that it matched like our trajectory of what I believe was sustainable in the data business, right? Where, there are any number of pitfalls that everybody in the data business has to deal with around like, privacy and different rules and regulations around the world and different countries and different things. And for us, having a much more sustainable growth trajectory was more important than winning at all costs, right? And like pushing the limit on those things. And that's not exactly a story I found that resonates particularly well with venture capital. Be like, we're going to grow and we're going to continue to grow. But like our goal here is not that we will become $1 billion unicorn exit. And their model, right, as has been explained to me very explicitly over the past bunch of years, is it's unicorns or bust. Right? The unicorns pay for the entire show, and they're not interested in businesses that will go from 5 million to 10 million to 15 million, even if it's profitable and whatnot. It's about like the big money is what pays for their entire endeavor. So taking that basic idea, there are then other types of ways you can go about funding a business, right? And for us, sticking with profitability as well as a strategic investor like a Semrush, matched with our idea of where we wanted to go, success and numbers wise.
And Semrush weren't looking for a unicorn, right? Like this was a strategic investment.
Yeah, I mean, that to me, you could define it. I would say that's when I think of a strategic investor is that they invest in businesses that arguably have like long-term value to their business. It's not just like an independent, like, well, it's just a financial analysis that's worth this much. We sell it for this much, whatever it may be. And then they have any number of types of companies. It has to, be a potential cog in the future wheel, right? At least in theory, like it would go that way. So, and big businesses like a Semrush or any other, tend to have a different growth trajectory, right? They're not growing at 500% a year every year forever, right? Because that's just not how it works. So yeah, I think that's if I were to go to advice, if somebody's listening to this, is you're founding a company and you're going to raise money. You really got to think about what are the motivations or what are the success metrics of the people that are loaning you money or investing in you, and making sure that those things are aligned. Because if they're not, it's going to be a major problem down the road inside of that boardroom, on your cap table, and wherever you go from there.
Which I suppose also the investors are supposed to clarify as they enter. Like what they expect, it sounds like basic alignment of expectations, but yeah, it sounds like it could definitely go wrong if that's not something that's aligned.
Yeah, but I'll tell you, everybody was very transparent about that alignment. I say us, I say everybody. And that's where, again, having background and experience in this, having been involved in these things, seen the pitches, been at different businesses, talking to founders, my colleagues, people I've worked for, it was going into it that I wasn't surprised, right? There wasn't anything that I was walking into where I was like, well, why wouldn't you want to do this? That doesn't make any sense to me. And then feeling on, when you're on your heels, right? Like having discussions, it was very transparent to say, this is how we see things. This is how they saw things. And like, what could it look like? And when you got to term sheets, this is what that looks like and what everybody sees. So that to me was very helpful for us to be able to determine the right partners and the right path.
And what was the differentiation that you went to market with?
Well, for us, I think this goes back to the data businesses that happen most of the time. So let's even take our venture capital funded or growth businesses. A lot of companies will start out as data as a service, but eventually, certainly at the time, if you go back into I'm going to call it like around 2010 to 2020-ish, right? Like I'll use that as our range there. Everything was about SaaS, right? As in like it's software as a service, it's repeatable, it's subscriptions. Again, if you use all of your cliches, like build your moat, do these things and all this stuff. All that's fine, right? Like all that, those are great businesses and ways to go about doing things. But most of the time, so this goes back to my point about raising of money and where you're going to go, is you may start out as a data business, but like big investors are going to want you to eventually shut off everything else going on around you and like take back ownership of it and build your own. So you can start with data as a service, but eventually you need to be creating insights and analytics on top of that data. And that's when you start to have like your unique proprietary, et cetera, right? The stuff that starts to roll out versus, as you heard me say earlier, perpetual data supply, right? And that, was our general vision. And I could say that, when I would speak to people in the marketplace and my experience with this, perpetual data supply was not necessarily a way that everybody was going. So that's where we began. And then the second, and I I can't speak to how anybody else does anything, but like when you talk about, I know how we went about doing our business was our entire thing was about building trust, right? And it still is. And it's never about the first contract, right? And we say it, and I say it very explicitly to clients. I say, it's not the first contract that I care about. It's the next 10. Right. You plant a tree based on what it's going to look like in 5 or 10 years, not like I just put this seed in the ground and like, how's it going to look this following spring? And I also felt that that was a tactic that played very well for us because it's true, right? That's how we believe things philosophically speaking. And going back to, building with companies, like, being the supply end of their building, that's also something that we leaned very heavily into was that your needs and ours are aligned, right? You do well, we do well. And I can't say that that's necessarily how every company looks at things. Like many companies look at every negotiation, every partnership, every discussion as adversarial, right? As in like, I have to win. And, I'm a bigger believer that the best business that gets done, the best deals are where both sides walk away and feel like they won. Right now, maybe there's some degree of compromise there or whatever that may be. But I think that goes back to the sustainability strategy of how, we have done things. So yeah, if you talk about secret sauce, those are a couple of items where I would say that's where we started that have certainly played out and continue to play out well for us.
So like in a sentence, what does Datos help companies do?
Yeah, you have, I'll just go back to it, perpetual, dependable, high fidelity data supply, right? Like that's it, right? Whatever it is, whatever metaphor you want to use, Noah, if you don't like sugar, I'm happy you could go with, oil or anything else for that matter. But concrete for building houses, I used to call it bricks for building cathedrals. Like you go any which way with it. But, it's the broader supply chain that we all live within in a global landscape, no company is going to be able to do everything on their own, right? That's the nature of things. You need to have partnerships. You need to have friends. You need to have like companies and people that you could depend upon. So yeah, you go back to it. That's what it is. Like just that, you work with us. This is something that you could depend on forever. Right. That's how we look at it. And once you're able to like say, you know what, this is something that I don't have to worry about anymore. It allows you to be able to focus on the other things that are more difficult, more complex, so you need to worry about. So that's what I do is like, I am here to help with peace of mind on something that can be very difficult to navigate, like the worldwide data landscape. It's changing.
Yeah. And the regulation is killing everyone.
Right. It's very complicated. But that's our niche, right? That's where we focus, is that we are the lean forward, like on the front lines of that on behalf of our clients, so that we're figuring out how to be able to take the hits and, hopefully protect them from, what are all of the troubles that they could potentially get themselves with if they go and do something that they shouldn't. Yeah. So yeah, it's a protective measure, right? I think that where we come from, like I am here to help them sleep better at night as it relates to that data supply end of things, which is hairy at best. I
understand. Well, it's a nice vision. And like you already answered what your superpower is, but I'm going to give you another chance in case, when zooming out, and asked what your superpower is. Is it 0 to 1, or do you feel like the core is lies somewhere else? Well, there's the
0 to 1 is a nice way to say it, right? Like here's a little tidbit. But I would say that one of the superpowers here is time. And it's one of those things that you can't speed up. And what I mean by that is a career is built brick by brick over the course of years and decades, right? So when it comes to superpower, it's having all of those things behind me, right? All of the successes, all of the failures, right? All of the stops, all of the starts, the entire thing is, and I am not unique in that, right? But I think that, I have certainly going back to that self-awareness point, I am very self-reflective about anything that I have ever seen or done or been involved with. And that the amount of experience that has happened over the course of the past 25, 26, however many years now, God, even more, I can't count, with a lot of years, is that's something that I think about me 10 years ago, 20 years ago, like how I saw things. So yeah, I would call that, like, that is more of, I'm going to call it like an esoteric thing, right? It's like, can't really quantify it besides the actual time range, but the amount of experiences that have, made this what it is really helps with whatever the future ones may bring.
Of course. And your kryptonite?
My kryptonite, I would say this is I would say I'm an empath, but I love people, right? Like I'm just really into people, and like I love the people that work with me, work for me, et cetera. And part of that kryptonite sometimes is maybe not making moves fast enough or early enough, with regards to personnel that I probably should have made. Right, because of like loyalty, right? Like people, again, going back to you.
But it is so horrible, right? Like just having to terminate someone's employment. It is horrible. It's horrible.
Right, like, and I think I had an old boss that used to say to me, he's like, listen, and his boss used to say this to him. So, it sort of is a chain of things, but the philosophy was, here's the rope, now don't hang yourself with it. And I'm definitely a believer in that, which is I want to give everybody as much autonomy to be able to succeed and fail and figure things out without me micromanaging it. So that's what I mean by I love people, is I want to give people an opportunity to be able to flourish, right? Like one of my great career regrets, and it's a collective one, which is at times when I have hired people or put them in positions and I haven't been in a position to set them up to be successful, right? Like it's a major thing for me, where I am overly, like focused on it to be like, I want to make sure. So is the failure mine? Is in I didn't give them what they needed in order to be successful and make it happen. But it's, here's how I'll say it, right? So that's the headline, right? Is that figuring out personnel and the way to be able whom you should invest in and whom maybe you should not invest in, and how to be able to do it can be difficult. But I've actually distilled that exact thought down into two things, right? Is I feel that almost everybody, pretty much everybody, myself included, that I have ever hired or interviewed falls into one of two buckets, both of which could be of great value to any organization, but you cannot put the wrong people in the wrong bucket. So my kryptonite was not knowing this early enough. Which bucket should they be in? And the buckets are stereo instructions or mumblecore. Now, stereo instructions are, as you would think, which are some people, in order to be successful, they need a playbook. They need to know exactly from day one, training, lay it out. You say, this is the script, these are the steps that you follow. Turn here, buzz here, push button, and this is the recipe for success. And they will follow that to a T. And stereo instructions people, if you do that, will be successful. Mumblecore is an improv filmmaking technique, which is more or less distilled down to say, the director would sort of give the improv actors in the scene, say, these are the high notes of the scene, this is where we need to land, but how you get there is totally up to you, and I'm just going to film you all doing it. And then if you have the right people in the room, and they are mumblecore people, as I'm calling it, they could create magic. And the biggest problem that it took me a long time to figure out was, one, how I wanted to define those two types of people, but putting a mumblecore person in a stereo instructions role or vice versa. And so kryptonite is still to this day having to very quickly, because think about it, you don't have to go through 900 interviews to hire somebody, but you best figure out like which bucket people are going to be in, and like where they need to be successful, and then figuring out what they need to be successful. Because you give stereo instructions to a mumblecore person and they are going to shut down. They're going to be like, I hate this. I cannot flourish. But you give mumblecore instructions, a stereo instructions person, it's over. They're lost. They're never going to get there. So, yeah.
That is so true. Like that is making me revisit several things and suddenly click for me. That's so accurate.
That's just how that's how I look at it, to like try and simplify it. But yeah, kryptonite is not getting that right. It keeps me up at night. So
So Eli, what's next for you?
Well, I mean, what's next is, now that we're merging into Semrush, right? We're 2 years into the acquisition. I have formally joined as SVP of Product Solutions, which is effectively like big data strategy across all of the Semrush companies and the solutions and like what goes on there. It's really interesting. It's making that work, right? Like Datos still going. We're rocking. Like Datos, a Semrush company, doing well, very exciting with all of that. But, that is now part of a bigger whole, right? So going back to like the next step up here. So what's next is continuing to scale that out in a way that, myself, the entire Datos team that is now part of Semrush, and everybody from Semrush that's with us, all the partners, everybody we work with is happy, right? And happy is success, right? Like when it comes to the data actually delivering on something and not just like, here, let me dump a bunch of data parts in your lab. Good luck.
Yeah, data optimized into happiness.
I mean, in the business world, happiness certainly has to do with the checks that are being cut. So like, I'm not gonna pull any punches there. I'm not saving the world, right? Like there are people out there that are actually saving the whales. Like this is just about data to be able to help everybody keep the world going around. But, you can create value all you want, but in the end, like a business needs to create, it needs to create wealth, right? And I say that not just about the dollars, but that's everybody that works at that company, their ability to buy houses and keep their family safe and, travel and have experiences. Like that to me is really like what it's about. That's what a modern, healthy economy is. So yeah, anything that I and we could do to continue to contribute to that as much as possible.
And just the last question. If now you have one, you said you're 0 to 1%, right? You know how to make money from nothing. If you had one trick or one advice to anybody that's opening a business, okay, that is more not on the value, but on the EBITDA and on the cash flow, what would be the best tip you can give him?
Well, I'll break it into two parts, actually, right? Not to double up on my one tip, but one is you got to pick up the phone, right? It's a contact sport. If you want to be able to, no matter what it is, it doesn't matter what your gig is. And by pick up the phone, that could also involve emails and stuff like that. But like, you have got to talk to people, right? And it's just a numbers game, right? You need to make sure that people are aware of what you're doing and you talk to enough of them, right? And sometimes you have a high hit rate, sometimes it's low, but like there is nothing stopping you from, and that's what I did for those first 18 months of the company, is I just called and hit and emailed and LinkedIn every single person that I had ever met in my entire career. And then everybody that sat in a seat that was related to any of that. There is no substitute for like that piece, right? Selling of things. The two most difficult things in selling, or again, that 0 to 1 to me, is one is just like finding people that would be sales opportunities. Sucks. Cold calling, emailing, shaking hands at events, whatever it may be. It's just the worst. The second one, and this is for a whole nother podcast probably, is after somebody says, yes, I will buy that, and then getting them to sign on the dotted line. Probably the second worst part. But yeah, just to go back to your original point is you have to make the first move, right? In anything, right? It's nobody is going to come and drag you off your couch and be like, great, let's go out. Let's go to the party. Like, let's do it. You've got to pick yourself up and get moving. So
you have to be the party.
You have to do it, right? Like, and I think that's very hard for almost everybody to be able to do, right? It's that first step, especially as our world continues to be, swipe right, like click button, like et cetera. There's just like less and less interaction. And not to cliche it, but people buy from people.
Yeah, you win on human. The human becomes the commodity. All right, Eli, thank you so much for your time and lots of luck. And say hi to Eugene from us.
No, you got it. Totally fun. Thank you for having me on the show. I appreciate it.
All right, have a great day.
That's all for today's episode. We hope you enjoyed it. If you did, please consider subscribing to our podcast so you never miss an episode. Also, if you have a moment, we would really appreciate it if you could rate and review our podcast on the platform you're listening to. This will help others find our show. And as always, if you know anyone who you think would enjoy our podcast, please share it with them. Thank you so much for listening. We'll be back as usual on the 1st of the month.
Real life.
Superpowers.
Up in the sky, it's a bird. It's a plane.
Gentlemen, we can rebuild
Superpowers.